emperor had a childhood. In a vision he showed to a custodes, we can witness part of this childhood. The boy who would be king rose from the floor of his family's hut and walked out into the settlement, his father's skull clutched in one hand. His barefooted walk took him to the home of his father's brother. The man sat outside the mud brick hut and uttered the sound that meant the boy's name. In response to this greeting, the boy held up his father's skull. Many centuries after these events, citizens of even civilized and advanced cultures would often misunderstand exactly what a myocardial infarction was. This happened to the boy's uncle when he set eyes upon the skull of his murdered brother. The boy who would be king watched with neither remorse nor any particular hostility. Others came real infarction.
Oh, heart attack.
Myocardial infarction was. This happened to the boy's uncle when he set eyes upon the skull of his murdered brother. The boy who would be king watched with neither remorse nor any particular hostility. Others came running. They shouted. They cried. They made the noises of language that spoke of panic and sorrow in a Proto-Indo-European tongue that would come to be known as an early precursor to the Hittite dialect. The boy walked away, heading back towards his family's hut. On the way, he turned to the figure, clad in gold, who walked nearby. "Hello, Ra." Ra went to one knee, dazed at the sight of a Terra that hadn't existed for millennia. "My emperor." The boy rested a hand on the giant's chest plate. His expression was reflective, if not entirely serene. He didn't smile. The man that this boy would become never smiled either. "You have never shown me this memory before." "No, I have not. This is where it all began, Ra. Here on the banks of the Sakarya River." The boy turned his old eyes to the river itself. So much water, so much life. If I have been disappointed by the galaxy's wonders, it is only because we were fortunate enough to grow in such a cradle. There was so much to learn, Ra. So much to know. It pleases me for you to see what it once was. Ra couldn't help but smile at the boy's distractive, contemplative tone. He had heard it many times before in another man's voice. "I'm honored to see it, sire." After a discussion of the war within the webway, the emperor continued speaking of his childhood. "You watched that man die, did you not?" "I did. That was my uncle, my father's brother." "You killed him?" "Yes, he struck my father from behind with a piece of sharpened bronze too poorly made to even be called a knife. Men had killed one another for generations before my birth, but this was the first slaying that had resonance to me, that changed my existence. It was illuminating. The very first murder was also a fratricide, thousands of years before this. But it is curious to me. Brothers have always killed brothers. I wonder why that is. Some evolutionary flaw, some ingrained emotional fragility written into mankind's core, perhaps. This night was significant not for the murder, but for the deliverance of justice. For my uncle's deed, I stopped his heart's function and forced him to die. In eras to come, this will be called the Lex Talionis, the law of retaliation, or more simply, an eye for an eye. The emperor had a
Japan's household spending rose for the first time in 3 years in 2025.
Food has gotten expensive, so I tried to look for the most low-cost places. I like this shopping street because I can compare prices.
Ladies and gentlemen, Japan is facing a horrific economic crisis.
The Japanese economy is facing a peculiar problem.
It's now the world's most indebted country with a debt to GDP ratio 248%.
We've just seen the biggest one-day move on the Nikkei 225 since 1987.
A combination of deflation, rising debt has suppressed growth in Japan.
In 2025, 10,000 companies went bankrupt in Japan. And out of these 10,000 companies, 300 companies shut down not because they ran out of money, but because they ran out of humans.
In Japan, over a fifth of the population are now over 70.
From the crowded streets of Tokyo, you'd never guess that Japan's population problem isn't too many people, it's too few.
Due to the labor shortage, the factory faced the real possibility of shutting down.
At the same time, Japan is shutting down 450 schools per year because there are no children to attend. This is the kind of population and economic collapse that has never been seen before in modern history. But you know what? In the 1980s, the same Japan was growing so fast that the average income of a Japanese citizen grew from $500 in 1960s to $25,000 in the 1980s. And even though Japan was 26 times smaller than America, Japanese land was worth 4 times more than the entire land of United States. In fact, Japan was growing so fast that they went from a poor country to almost beating the GDP of United States of America. While US was at 7.6 trillion, Japan was at $5.5 trillion.
The Japanese now enjoy the highest standard of living in Asia.
Japan had established itself as a global manufacturing powerhouse.
The economy was growing so fast that it looked like it was about to overtake the US as the world's biggest.
So the question is, when Japan was growing so fast, suddenly, how did they start stagnating? Why is the Japanese economy struggling today? And most importantly, what are the lessons that India needs to learn from the stagnation and struggle of Japan?
Facility in Tokyo distributes free second-hand clothes. More parents under financial stress.
The data also shows a harsh reality.
People are technically spending more, they're struggling to keep up with rising costs.
Before we dive in, let's take a moment to thank Odoo. Imagine a small manufacturing company in Pune that consistently juggles between multiple software tools, like one for inventory, another for accounting, and another for sales. And no more dealing with messy integrations included. So if you want to grow your business in a flash, check out the link in the description and start your journey with Odoo today. This is a story that dates back to 1949, when the entire world was slowly drawing into another world war, which started with the clash of America and Soviet Union. During this time, Soviet Union supported Mao Zedong to take over China. They also supported North Korea to invade South Korea. And sitting right in the middle of this chaos was Japan. Back in the 1940s, Japan got defeated in World War II. 67 major cities of Japan had been bombed, millions of people were starving, and the Japanese economy was dying.
The city was turned into a desert. Everything is burnt, smashed, annihilated. It's an apocalypse. Women, children, and old people died more slowly and silently, badly burned or irradiated.
Now, America was terrified. Why? Because if a devastated and desperate Japan turned towards communism, the Soviet Union would gain a powerful ally in Asia. So China, Japan, and North Korea, all three countries would have fallen for communism. And this is when America realized that a hungry man doesn't care about democracy. A hungry man cares about bread. So if the Soviet Union offered bread and the US offered freedom, the hungry Japanese would always choose bread over freedom. In fact, Japan back then already had 6.5 million soldiers who didn't have a job. So America was scared that if a communist party promised them a meal and a purpose, the Soviets could have an armed revolution in Japan within weeks. And if the Soviet Union took control of Japan, the Pacific Ocean would have become a Soviet lake. And the threat to the United States would arrive at the beaches of California. So Uncle Sam had no choice but to take control of Japan. This is when America stopped treating Japan like a prisoner and decided to turn Japan into a capitalistic miracle. Why? Because America needed a case study. They wanted to tell the world, look, if you side with America, you will become rich. And if you side with the Soviets, you will starve in war. So America did three things for Japan. Number one, they pumped billions of dollars into Japanese factories and saved companies like Toyota from bankruptcy. Number two, they handed over blueprints for steel and electronics so that Japanese factories could start producing steel and electronics at scale. And lastly, they let Japan sell unlimited goods to US consumers. And you know what? This was such a miraculous move that in just 20 years, Japan grew so fast that Japan beat Germany, UK and France to become the third largest economy of the world. By 1980s, while Japanese cars captured 23% of US market, American companies were struggling. In fact, Chrysler was so close to bankruptcy that it had to practically beg the US government for a $1.5 billion bailout. In the 1970s, US held 60% of the global semiconductor market. But by 1989, Japan overtook US and held 51% of the market, while US was down to 35%. In the 1980s, while 6 out of the top 10 companies in the world by market cap were Japanese, American companies were laying off thousands of workers just to survive. Now think about this from the American perspective. They saw Japanese factories stealing American jobs. They saw Toyota crush Ford and General Motors in their own country, and the situation was so bad that auto workers were literally smashing Japanese cars with sledgehammers, and that too on live television.
The car you're looking at, a 78 Toyota Corolla. How many hits on this car?
It's $1 a hit.
This is when the politicians of America realized that Japan had become a threat to the American economy. So in 1985, America told Japan to sign something called the Plaza Accord. And this is where the Japanese economy got paralyzed. This accord devalued the dollar against yen. As simple as that. And look at this, in 1985, $1 was worth 260 yen. But in 1987, suddenly $1 was equal to just 130 yen. So suddenly, a Toyota car that would have cost $10,000 in America now had to be sold for $20,000 just to make the same profit in yen. So Japan's cost advantage vanished overnight and their exports started collapsing. Now, to prevent this collapse from happening, Japan did two things. Number one, to survive, Japanese giants like Mitsubishi and Toyota began moving their factories out of Japan into Southeast Asia and even the United States. So high-paying manufacturing jobs started to disappear from Japan. And secondly, the Japanese banks reduced interest rates from 5% to 2.5% so that businessmen could borrow and invest that money into better technology and reduce the cost of Japanese products. And this is where the disaster started. You know what the problem was? Instead of investing this money into technology, people and businesses started pumping this money into the Japanese stock market, Japanese land market, and Japanese real estate market. And this is where a dangerous Japanese bubble started.
Japan was in the throes of an economic bubble.
To safeguard their profits, it was in the bank's interest that land prices should continue up.
And the Nikkei stock index tripled in value.
Look at this, in the early 1980s, the Nikkei 225 shot up from 6,000 points to 38,915 points in 1989. So the stock market was practically delivering 300% to 500% returns to its investors. And when this happened, you know what the companies did? Companies like Sony, Sanyo and Toyota, they started trading the stock markets instead of investing in great products to make money in the export market. In fact, in the late 1980s, nearly 30% of Toyota's pre-tax profits came from trading and not car sales. Similarly, Nissan, Sony, and 327 other companies had massive profits from such practices like trading and not their core product sales. In fact, many companies went to the bank and said, look, my $100 million stock is now worth $500 million, so you gotta give me a loan of $400 million. And then these $400 million were invested into land and real estate. And this is what gave rise to another bubble. This was the land and real estate bubble of Japan. And just like stocks, again, even land prices in Japan started to shoot up by 200 to 300%. In fact, by 1989, Japanese land became so expensive that the total value of all land in Japan was estimated to be 4 times greater than all land in the United States. But one fine day, just like every other bubble, the Japanese government realized that they had messed up. So suddenly, the interest rates of the banks were increased from 2.5% to 6%. And this is when all hell broke loose. And think about this. These companies had borrowed billions of dollars from the bank. They invested that money in the market to make a profit. And this money was then used to repay the banks and take out more loans. But now the problem was this cycle broke apart. Now these companies had a lot of land and stock, but they lost 50 to 70% of value. And now these companies had billions of dollars in debt, but no cash or asset to pay it back. In fact, when the stock market came crashing down, Nissan had $20 billion in debt and no money to pay. Similarly, in 1989, Sony bought Columbia Pictures for $4.8 billion because the money was cheap to borrow. It was the largest Japanese acquisition in American history.
1989. A Japanese corporation's desire to purchase a Hollywood movie studio, turning Japanese outsiders against American corporate titan. Sony makes a move on Columbia. 2 big deals that break all the rules.
But when the Japanese economy collapsed in 1990, Sony was stuck, and by 1994, they had to write off $2.7 billion in losses, one of the biggest financial disasters in movie history. And lastly, Toshiba was the king of memory chips in the world. They were so good that American companies like Intel quit the memory business because Toshiba was excellent at it. But you know what? When the bubble came bursting, Toshiba was paralyzed by debt. And this is when a South Korean company called Samsung poured all the money in the world into aggressive low-cost production and eventually dethroned Toshiba to become the king of the market. And overall, this crash was so bad for Japan that it took their stock market 34 years to recover. On top of that, in 1995, Japan's nominal GDP reached $5.5 trillion. But instead of growing quickly, the economy shrank by $1 trillion in the next 30 years. And lastly, the average income in Japan has not risen since 1995. So today, young Japanese people are technically poorer than their parents were in 1989. And this brings us to the final chapter. When the Japanese economy was failing, what did Japan do? Well, this is where the Japanese government made another mistake. They panicked, and instead of letting companies go bankrupt like America did in 2008, the Japanese government tried to keep these companies alive just to avoid a complete collapse. So if company A owed the bank $100 million but couldn't pay it back, instead of declaring them bankrupt, the bank gave them another loan of $5 million just to pay the interest on the first loan. So the company wasn't technically bankrupt, but it was not alive either. It was a zombie company, existed only to pay interest. And you know what? By the early 2000s, it was estimated that 30%, I repeat, 30% of all Japanese firms were zombies. These companies did not hire new people, they didn't buy new machines, and they didn't innovate at all. They just existed. And this zombie economy cursed Japan in 3 tragic ways. Firstly, Japan entered an innovation black hole. While the US was funding Tesla and Google type companies, Japan was funding dying department stores. Secondly, zombie companies sold their products at rock bottom prices just to get cash. So if a zombie company made LCDs, they would make it at $400 and sell it for, let's say, $410 just to get cash. But due to this terrible pricing, a new company could not sell LCDs at $500. So no price increase led to no profit increase, no profit increase led to no wage increase, and no wage increase further stagnated consumption. And lastly, Japan got cursed with the labor shortage paradox. In most countries, if you graduate during a recession and you can't find a job, you work at a cafe for 2 years, gain some skills, and then apply to a big company when the market recovers. But when the Japanese bubble burst, to save money, companies simply stopped hiring new graduates for a decade. For a decade. So that entire generation only worked at 7-Eleven stores to make money. But now, those young graduates from 1995 are 50 years old, and since they spent 25 years working at 7-Eleven, they never learned high-level skills like management, coding, or strategy. So they're still living off their parents' pension. Yes, 50-year-olds are still living on their parents' pensions. And today, while the Japanese companies are desperate for experienced leaders, they are not able to hire these 50-year-olds because they lack the experience. So this entire generation was wasted. And since a man without a permanent job was considered unsafe for marriage, a major chunk of the population either didn't get married or didn't have children, which again contributed to the population collapse. In fact, in 2015, nearly 1 in every 4 men in Japan had remained unmarried until the age of 50. And back then in 1970s, Japan used to have 2 million births per year. And demographers said that if the birth rate in Japan fell below 800,000, the economy would become unsustainable. But now, the birth rates in Japan have fallen below 680,000 births a year. That is how Japan went from being an economic miracle to an economic disaster. And this story of Japan teaches us 3 very, very important lessons. Number 1, every nation must allow inefficient, debt-ridden companies to fail through robust bankruptcy laws to free up capital for high-growth startups. India, by the way, was stuck with this problem till 2016. And in 2016, we introduced the Indian Bankruptcy Code, which, by the way, now has also become inefficient. Number 2, never be over-dependent on a single trading partner. We saw that with both Japan and Venezuela. And lastly, we all need to remember that a healthy population is a blessing. But currently, it is turning into a curse for India. Today, more than 50% of graduates in India are unemployable. So just like Japan, we are giving rise to a dud generation that will then choke our economy into an irreversible ditch. And I just hope the politicians of India wake up and do something about it. That is the story of Japan. And I just hope you learned something valuable from this case study. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTuber happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज और कुछ प्राइवेट अस्पतालों के बीच एक नेक्सस की वजह से आम आदमी का खतरनाक तरीके से साइलेंट एक्सप्लॉयटेशन हो रहा है।
अस्पताल का एक बिल भी किसी मिडिल क्लास परिवार को पूरी तरह बर्बाद कर सकता है।
5 to 6 crore people get into poverty because of one bad incident.
ऐसी कोई कंपनी मैंने तो नहीं देखी जो बड़ी है और उसके बारे में कंप्लेन नहीं आया।
मैंने अपने रिक्वायरमेंट्स को किस तरीके से असेस करके इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी को चूज करना चाहिए।
सबसे ज्यादा मिस सेलिंग यही होती है। सिंपल ये रखना चाहिए दिमाग में कि कौन सी कंपनीज हैं जिनका क्लेम सेटलमेंट रेशियो अच्छा है। जैसे ही आप वो करोगे, आपकी जो 30-40 कंपनियों की लिस्ट है वो अपने आप कम होकर 5-6 हो जाएगी।
What has been on my mind lately? Some of you are going to be able to guess. In April 2010, film critic Roger Ebert, he made an infamous claim. He said, video games can never be art. Yeah, I know. His blog post set off this firestorm of discussion. I was there back then on the internet. I'm old, and yeah, everyone was talking about it. Talking about kind of how he's an out-of-touch old man yelling at clouds. Maybe yelling at clouds that were actually shrubs. Mario joke. Some of you old-timers know that. I disagree profoundly with Mr. Ebert, but he was an intelligent, articulate scholar, and he had a better point than this clickbaity quote might imply. His argument was this: games are about mechanics and winning, not about aesthetic enjoyment. So if I'm going to summarize him too briefly, and he wrote a long blog post on this 2 years later, you can still look up on his website. I essentially said that while video games can contain art, such as an amazing digital painting, they're not at their core art, because their focus is on obstacles to overcome in order to win. By being victory-focused, he argued they were an innately commercial product, like a toaster, and not able to be considered art. Now, I'm not going to spend this speech taking down an old essay by a man who's been dead for over a decade now. Anyone who deeply loves video games will know his argument just fails to understand what gaming is on a fundamental level. Those of us who are gamers know that the mechanics themselves can be part of the art. And in fact, video games let us tell stories that you couldn't tell in any other medium because the mechanics are part of that artistic experience. Winning isn't the art, but the emotions of winning can be part of it. Why do I bring this up? Well, my goal today is to tackle a few questions that Mr. Ebert raised, which I think are more important today than they've ever been, right? Because my goal is to talk about what is art and why we make it. Now, I know some of you are flinching right now, and you're thinking, Brandon's gonna whinge about AI art again. But no, I'm gonna whinge about AI art again with slides, so it's different. In a more relevant way, I want to dig into my own feelings on this topic from a philosophical standpoint, right? The surge of large language models and generative AI raises questions that are fascinating. And even if I dislike how the movement is going in relating to writing and art, I want to learn from the experience of what's happening. We're being forced to ask ourselves about art in a way we never have before. Now, some do say we're in an AI bubble. Perhaps a collapse is coming. But even if it does come, I think what has happened so far is enough to force us to confront these questions of what is art, why do we make it? Now, I explore my ideas through writing. And so I ask you to join me for, these next 20 minutes or so as I explore this idea. And in so doing, help me figure out why I, Brandon Sanderson, rebel so strongly against the idea of AI art. And it was in writing this essay that I kind of figured it out. Anyone that heard this song? This was pretty big a few weeks back. This is Walk My Walk. It's an AI-generated song. It was #1 song on Billboard's Digital Country Songs list a couple of weeks ago. When it happened, everyone was like, wait, an AI song is #1? Billboard admitted that there had been 6 in the last few months that had topped their charts that had been generated by AI. In addition, earlier this year, author Mark Lawrence, one of my colleagues, is a fantasy novelist. He did a series of tests where he had AI write a passage and then had novelists do the same thing. Pretty short passages, but the test included our friend Robin Hobb, friend of the convention and fantastic writer, among others, including Mark Lawrence himself. He posted all of these passages without attributions and had people see if they could figure out which were written by authors and which he had had the generative AI create. And the results, which you can find on his blog, indicate that the audience couldn't tell the difference. Now, he quickly explains this isn't a very scientific test, and AI is pretty bad at long-form storytelling right now. If you ask it to write a book, it does very poorly. But if it writes a passage, it can, in some situations, write prose that we can't tell. So this is why I say we are there. Even if the bubble happens and this all collapses, we are there. We have to be asking these questions right now because it can already imitate some of your favorite authors. When I hear of these two examples, Walk My Walk and the Mark Lawrence thing, my stomach turns. And I am worried, genuinely, that I'm against AI art just because it's new and unfamiliar. That I am the Roger Ebert in this case. And he was just in the last in a long line of artistic disbelievers. When prose began to be used for storytelling a lot instead of poetry, some considered its practitioners, many of whom were women, I'm sure that was just a coincidence, to be creating lesser art than those who wrote poetry. In the 1800s, critics explained that photography shouldn't count as art because it merely captured what already existed in the world. And in the early 1900s, some high-profile critics argued that film shouldn't be considered art because of how base a form of entertainment it was. And that's an argument I'm pretty sure that Mr. Ebert would have disagreed with vehemently. It stands to reason if all these critics were wrong, just as Mr. Ebert was wrong about video games, then maybe I'm wrong about AI. Isn't it just another form of expression? Some people certainly think so. What is art? Why do we make it? And why do I rebel against the use of it? Let me examine a few common objections. I want to start there, right? Do I dislike AI because of the economic and environmental impacts? Well, they do concern me. But if I'm answering honestly, I would still have a problem with it even if AI were not so resource hungry, right? Do I dislike it because the model's been trained on the works of artists in ways I consider unethical? Well, I don't like that. But even if it were trained using no copyrighted work, I'd still be concerned, right? I think we all would be. They're valid objections, but they don't get to the soul of it for me. Maybe I just hate the idea of a machine replacing a person. For a while, I've imagined that if we needed a heroic symbol of resistance against AI art, we actually have the perfect choice in American folklore. It's John Henry. Do you guys know the story of John Henry? John Henry's an American folk hero. He's a steel driver. Steel driver was this job where they would have to cut holes through thick rock and make a tunnel for a railroad. And they do that by pounding a spike drill into a stone with a hammer and making a spot, and then people could put dynamite in that, right? So John Henry, the myth of John Henry, is of this man who was the best steel driver ever, and then a steam-powered drill came along. And he challenged that drill to a contest to drill a tunnel through stone and see who could do it faster. You might have seen the Disney interpretation of this. I watched it when I was a little kid. So he did it, right? John Henry was able to steel drive better than the drill, and then he died from exertion. This is a result I circle around because it seems the story illustrates what I have to acknowledge. John Henry beat the steam-powered drill, but it cost him his life. And while he proved he could beat a steam-powered drill personally, he didn't change the world. We respect him, but as a society, we chose the steam drill, right? And I would too. I mean, let's be honest. I'm not sure that I fully dislike AI just because it's replacing a human. It's getting closer to the reason, but there's more. Truth is, I'm more than happy to have steam engines drilling tunnels for me to drive through. I don't even dislike AI because it's poorly done, because as we've shown, not all AI can I even tell what is good and what isn't, what is machine and what isn't. I hope I can tell what is good. I've listened to Walk My Walk, and it's catchy. I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between it and a human-made song. I read the Mark Lawrence test, and I couldn't tell which one was Robin Hobb and which one was AI. So why? Why does it bother me so much? Like a lot of things, we can look to Star Trek for help. I am a nerd, after all. So my Star Trek was Next Generation. I'd stay up late at night, and I'd watch it because it was at 11 o'clock. And my mom would want me to turn off my TV because it was 11 o'clock Sunday, so there was school the next day. And I would not because I was watching Star Trek. Gotta watch my Star Trek. In Star Trek Next Generation, we got Data, right? He's an android, and a lot of his character arcs were about exploring what it means to be human. One of the recurring themes in the show was his attempts to create art, painting, poetry, music, become a comedian, take my wharf, please, classic line. I rooted for Data, a synthetic being without emotions, trying so hard to understand the human experience, and I still do. I have no problem with Data creating art. If he were real, I'd applaud him. Why do I empathize with Data, yet not the AI large language models? This question, this starts to get to the core of the issue for me. One of my favorite essays comes from the preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray. In it, Oscar Wilde, with characteristic wit, argues about a great number of things. I recommend it. It's only a page long. The book is fantastic too, but I've always preferred the prologue to almost anything else he's written. It ends with these lines. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. Now, of course, this is Oscar Wilde being a little bit silly. He tended to do that. He took lobsters on walks. But if you look at this idea, there is a point to making art that doesn't have to do with its usefulness. It doesn't have to do with what you can sell it for. It has to do with the intrinsic need to make art. I do think that part of the reason I dislike AI is because it is too focused on the product and not the process. Yes, the message is journey before destination. It is always journey before destination, but there's a specific take on it this time. This is a page in my first book. We had these on display at the World Hopper Ball. I don't know if they're out this year, but they might be. I wrote them longhand in these giant notebooks in Korea. We call this White Sand Prime. I started on it when I was 19, and it's not very good. It's one part ripoff of Dune, one part ripoff of Les Miserables, and one part ripoff of The Wheel of Time. But I wrote it. I did it myself, first word to last word, and there's a seed of something there that is all me. Part of this tale is the story of a young man, or a man who is weaker at magic than everyone else and has to learn to win by finesse and understanding how said magic works instead of by raw power. And that's a very Brandon sort of thing, isn't it? I would much later write a better version of this story, which we turned into the White Sand graphic novel. That said, I have no question that using the language models currently released, everyone in this audience could prompt AI to create a book that is better than White Sand Prime. It is truly awful. But here, this is a picture of my second book, Star's End. Isaac actually made me a print edition of it at one point, just as kind of a gift to me. This book also leans along on authors I'd read before, but the me is more apparent. In my third book, I return to the world of White Sand, and suddenly it starts to feel original. The plots are tighter, and the characterization is more solid. The world building goes beyond its influences. In my fourth book, Nightlife, I experimented with twists and started to develop my style of the Sanderlanche. And in my fifth book, The Sixth Incarnation of Pandora, I started experimenting with theme, specifically in relation to the books I'd read before, laying the foundation for me telling stories that are in conversation with the legacy of science fiction and fantasy I'd read, rather than just copying that legacy. Finally, we reach Elantris, where I brought all of this together. This is when I emerged for the first time as the author I would become. A fully realized fantasy epic, applying all the lessons I learned so far. After Elantris, I started to create the Cosmere, eventually landing at Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive. Maybe someday, the language models will be able to write books better than I can. But here's the thing. Using those models in such a way absolutely misses the point, because it looks at art only as a product. Why did I write White Sand Prime? It wasn't to produce a book to sell. I knew at the time that I wasn't going to write a book that was going to sell. It was for the satisfaction of having written a novel and feeling the accomplishment and learning how to do it. I tell you right now, if you've never finished a project on this level, it's one of the most sweet and beautiful and transcendent moments in my life was holding that manuscript, thinking to myself, I did it. I did it. This is the difference between Data and a large language model, at least the ones operating right now. Data created art because he wanted to grow. He wanted to become something. He wanted to understand. Art is the means by which we become what we want to be. The purpose of writing all those books in my earlier years wasn't to produce something I could sell. It was to turn me into someone who could create great art. It took an amateur and it made him a professional. I think this is why I rebel against the AI art products so much, because they steal the opportunity for growth from us. When prose came along, people didn't stop writing poetry. Photography didn't kill painting, and film didn't kill the stage play. Video might have killed the radio star. Video games didn't kill film, but how many steel driving men do you see these days? John Henry died and was replaced by a machine that could do his job, but he proved something important about the human spirit. Where will we go when there is no room for humans in art? You might say, well, if the AI gets good enough and the product is the same, what's the difference? The difference is that the books aren't the product. They aren't the art, not completely. And this is the point. The most important thing to understand is that the process of creating art makes art of you. My friends, let me repeat that. The book, the painting, the film script is not the only art. It's important, but in a way it's a receipt. It's a diploma. The book you write, the painting you create, the music you compose is important and artistic, but it's also a mark of proof that you have done the work to learn, because in the end of it all, you are the art. The most important change made by an artistic endeavor is the change it makes in you. The most important emotions are the ones you feel when writing that story and holding the completed work. I don't care if the AI can create something that is better than what we can create, because it cannot be changed by that creation. Writing a prompt for an LLM, even refining what it spits out, will not make an artist of you, because if you haven't done the hard part, if you haven't watched a book spiral completely out of control, if you haven't written something you thought was wonderful and then had readers get completely lost because your narrative chops aren't strong enough, if you haven't beat your head against the wall of dead ends on a story day after day until you break it down and find the unexpected path, you're not going to have the skill to refine that prompt. The machine will have done the hard part for you, and it doesn't care. It could be writing a shopping list or a story about the death of a family member. It cannot be changed. It can be changed by feeding it more copyrighted material, but creating the new work will not change it. It will not learn, it will not grow, it will not care. Art is useless, as Oscar Wilde said. Therefore, we have the power here and not the machine, for it was created to try to make something useful, but it cannot admire what it made. For a long while, I thought our position was the same as John Henry, that we were inevitably going to lose. But I'm starting to think that we don't have to. 15 years ago, Roger Ebert made a well-reasoned but ultimately uninformed statement. How many of you here think he was wrong, that video games can be art? You're right, not because I say it, but because we as a society say it. That's the great thing about art. We define it and we give it meaning. The machines can spit out manuscript after manuscript after manuscript. They can pile them to the pillars of heaven itself. But all we have to do is say no. If we do, they lose. John Henry couldn't ultimately stop the steam-powered machine, but we can fight the battle and we can win, because we get to choose what victory looks like. What is art? Art is what we define it to be. Why do we make art? Well, remember, art is not just the story. It is not just the painting or the sculpture or whatever else you love to create. It's also the process of creation and what that process did to you. We make art because we can't help it. It's part of us. We understand what it is. We are drawn to it because we are of the same substance. We are the arts. Thank you.
life on this earth is limited, that you don't get to do everything. See, it is the panic to try to do everything that turns you into the optimizer bot. Because I'm going to optimize this, and then I'm going to optimize this, I'm going to optimize this, and I'm going to optimize this. It's progress for the sake of progress. What is the problem that you are trying to avoid solving? Every time you move towards something, what are you moving away from? Something that I'm starting to see more of is people are what I would call relentless optimizers, right? So we have a culture right now where we have a bunch of people on the internet, like yours truly, who will tell you guys how to get more out of life, right? So we're like steering clear of politics, but like we're gonna use various kinds of products and services to optimize my life. Oh my God, there's this, I did not put this here, but that looks like Steven. Shout out to Steven. And so there's just a lot of people who are like, I gotta do better. I gotta do more. And sometimes these people become what I would like to call an optimizer bot, okay? And I know that's mean, so let me explain. I'm a dick. Okay. No, here's what I mean. So as a psychiatrist, I've worked with a ton of people who want to optimize. I myself also like to optimize. Like this setup over here has been optimized for my streaming pleasure, okay? So optimization is not bad, right? Becoming efficient is not bad. But sometimes what happens is people become optimizer bots. And they sort of optimize for the sake of optimization, for the sake of just like, I'm going to do more, because more is better, right? More money is better. More girlfriends, more boyfriends are better. More houses, bigger houses, just more is better. Why have one hot dog when you can have two? More is better. And they sort of relentlessly optimize. And so optimization doesn't become a means to an end, which, spoiler alert, that's when optimization is healthy. It becomes an end in and of itself. And what I've seen as a psychiatrist is when optimization becomes an end in and of itself, it actually masks other psychological problems. So one of the things that I love about being a psychiatrist is that I get to work with a lot of people. Like not all psychiatrists are like this, which is totally fine. You know, many psychiatrists, many of my mentors are like specialists in one area. So there's a guy named Dr. Michelon who's like, was an awesome mentor of mine, is just like one of the world's best experts in depression and in supplementation. So he's like absolute awesome guy, fantastic person to learn from. But what I sort of found when I was training is like, I kind of liked the variety of it. And what I've done is I've seen optimizers of many shapes and sizes. So I've seen people who are like, I'm a CEO, I exited my first company, now I'm optimizing my life so I can be a serial entrepreneur. Or, hey, I'm homeless and I really have to like get my shit together because I'm tired of being homeless. I need my first job. I'm addicted to pornography. I'm addicted to fentanyl. Like I need to like fix my life. Okay, so there's like a whole spectrum of people. So the first thing is there's not one optimizer. It's not one psychology. There's actually a different set of reasons why people become relentless optimizers. So I'll give you all an example. This is one that is very common for very successful people. So when I work with someone who's like entrepreneur or CEO or like, you know, senior VP of like sales in North America, or something like that. Many of these people are optimizers, right? So they do sauna, they do red light therapy, they do intermittent fasting. They're just amazingly productive human beings. And one of the things, there's a really interesting aspect of psychology, which is that one of the best ways you can run away from a problem is to solve a completely different problem. So sometimes when I run into relentless optimizers, why do they keep on optimizing? Because all of these optimizations are running away from the one problem they don't solve.
Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health.
And if you kind of tunnel down, okay, why aren't you motivated? And they're like, well, there's no point. And if you get underneath there's no point, what you ultimately find is hopelessness. So what the yogis discovered is that what we call motivation, they actually called a concentrated mind. What's the difference between someone who actually does stuff and someone who just tries to do stuff?
So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today.
There's a paper that is looking at burnout for software developers. And one of the reasons that software developers burn out is because when there is a task that they don't want to do, when they're procrastinating on one task, what they do is they spend a lot of time doing like little things that are not solving their main problem. And for senior developers, one of the key things that they do is junior code review. So it's like, I've got this big thing that like this big feature that I have to build, but I don't know how to build it, and I don't have the budget, and I don't have the time, and management keeps on changing their mind, and the feature isn't even going to work. Oh my God, what do I do about it? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into work today, and I'm going to do junior code review. So we as human beings have this very fundamental element of our psychology, which is that we don't like unsolvable problems. When I'm faced with an unsolvable problem, I need to do, like, I need to do something about it, but I don't know how to do something about it. And when we're faced with an unsolvable problem, it feels absolutely overwhelming, right? Because I need to do something, but I can't do something. I don't know what to do. It's psychologically torture. So what we do is shift to things that we can control. There's a saying, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Now, I don't even know if this story is right, is correct or not, is real or not. There's this story that when the Titanic was sinking, one of like the senior wait staff was like, oh my God, the deck chairs on the top of the Titanic are out of order. The ship is sinking, but we have to have the deck chairs in the right order. And you guys may have seen this. You may have had a parent who like is going through a bad situation at work or is stressed out in some way, and they show up and they're like, this needs to be done this way. Like, the shoes need to go in the cupboard like this way. These plates need to be wiped down this way. And they hyper focus on controlling one thing because they can't control something else. And the reason that you know this is the case is because for the optimizer, it's because we're relentlessly optimizing all kinds of random things. And really what we are, and this is where when I work with some of these executives and stuff, we'll like lean into shadow work, right? So it's like, what is the problem that you are avoiding by solving this other thing, and then solving this other thing, and solving this other thing, and solving this other thing? Because if you can be moving towards something, it gives you a sense that you're progressing. And if you're progressing over here, it's hard because of this principle called cognitive dissonance to feel stuck over here, right? So it's really hard for humans to feel progressing and stuck. This is an element of EQ that needs to be trained. In therapy, we'll call this the dialectic, right? So like, this person loves me and they're angry with me. It's hard to believe those two things at the same time. I recently realized, this is hard for me, that I have a very close family member that I dislike, but I love them immensely, right? It's hard to hold those two things at the same time. And so sometimes what the optimizer does is takes advantage of this. Because if I feel crippled and over here, I can optimize all of these different things. And this is how they become optimizer bots. Because I'm going to optimize this, and then I'm going to optimize this, I'm going to optimize this, and I'm going to optimize this. It's progress for the sake of progress. And oftentimes, if you're this kind of person, right, the key question that I usually ask in therapy or coaching is like, what is the problem that you are trying to avoid solving, right? Every time you move towards something, what are you moving away from? What's that one thing that is not going well in your life that you feel paralyzed in order to solve? And so that's the key question. But that's only one kind of psychology. Another reason why people optimize is because it's their way of measuring their value. So I one time asked someone, who's very successful, what drives your desire for money? And their answer was, it's the best way to keep score. In the game of life, how do you know who's winning? Because this person could be happy, this person could be healthy, this person could be sad. There's no way to know if I'm winning. Are you winning, son? And so, enter money. It's just the best way for me to understand whether I'm better than another human being. So another subtle reason why people are relentless optimizers, and once again, I'm not saying that optimization is bad, like it is a healthy part, a very productive part of life. But sometimes people optimize out of ego. They optimize because they want to be the best, right? And be the best for what? Be the best because you just want to be the best, because you don't really understand who you are, because you're not content in life, you are not at peace. So there's this idea that if I'm not at peace in life, if I become the best, then that somehow solves that problem. So people want to get better just because they want to get better, because they want to be number one. And this is also where, if we look at the vulnerability here, why does someone want to be the best? It's because they're not happy in who they are. So this is where it's like, the operative question here is, what does it feel like to not optimize something? Who do you become when you are not optimizing? And oftentimes this will uncover all kinds of terrible stuff. So I see this very commonly in people. I'm making them sound like assholes. They're not. I had a patient once who was bullied a lot in high school. This is terrible. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but sometimes in high school, in your freshman year, one of the worst things that can ever happen to you is someone can come up with a nickname that sticks and is derogatory. So when everyone's getting to know each other, when you're 15 years old, they slap you with a nickname. And since everybody's insecure and everyone's feeling not confident about themselves, it's really easy to dogpile onto this derogatory nickname, and that's what they call that person. So every time they have the wrong answer in class, when they fumble the football, the nickname comes out, the nickname comes out, the nickname comes out. And so once you get branded in this way, you feel like the worst. And so optimization enters the picture, because how does optimization enter the picture? Because you're at the bottom of the totem pole. And as long as you are getting better, you will never be at the bottom of the totem pole again. So this group of people sounds kind of like they're assholes, right? They're egotistical and they want to be number one. But the question is why? It's because they used to be number 100. They used to be number 1,000. And they vowed to themselves, never again. But then they get into a subtle problem. I don't know if this kind of makes sense. This is hard, but they start to associate and attach meaning to progress. Because I never want to be this thing over here. I want to be number one, and number one means I'm happy. Why does number one mean I'm happy? Because number 100 meant I was sad, right? So if I was sad down here and I achieve this, then I will be happy. And so now something really, really, really dangerous happens as they start to tie together being number one with happiness, because they tie together being number 100 with sadness. But it doesn't work like that. Right? The right way to be happy is to not run away from unhappiness. It is to work through unhappiness. If you guys wonder, what does that mean? Watch our video on emotional processing. Turns out was one of the best videos that we made last year, because people are like, I've heard this term, I don't know what it is. We're starting a deep dive on Monday, by the way, into emotional processing over on the membership side. So if y'all are interested in that, but you can watch the free video on YouTube. If you guys want more, then you can check out the membership one, but the video on YouTube's great. Okay, so the second reason to optimize is because I want to be number one, and I'm going to be the best. And the better I get at things, the closer I get to number one. Why do I want to be number one? Because I've been number 100. Don't ever want to be that again. There are other reasons why it can be associated with ego. So once again, this becomes an optimizer bot. You are just relentlessly optimizing for a reason that you don't even understand. The third reason, this is a little bit more esoteric. Actually, I don't know if that's fair. Number 3 reason why people relentlessly optimize comes down to a fear of death. So how does this work? Okay, so let's understand what optimization is. Optimization is getting more per unit of resource expended. Okay, so it's like making $100 instead of $50 per hour. And if we really look at a lot of this optimization, it's like, I don't want to spend time eating lots of food. I want to just have one drink that will deal with all of my nutrition, right? Like I want to learn I want to listen to podcasts while I'm walking around. I want a watch that will measure my sleep. I want to get more out of a fixed amount of resource. That's the fundamental of optimization. Makes sense, right? I want to get more. I want more. I want more per unit time. And generally speaking, when we think about what we're optimizing, if you really look at the denominator, the top can be whatever. It can be more muscles, more money, more nutrition, more longer lifespan. And then what ends up happening is per unit what? Per unit time. The denominator is almost always time, because if you look at what in a human life, what is the most limiting factor? The limiting factor is time. I need to read one book a month. Why? Why can't you read one book every 2 months? Why do you have to read 300 books a year? Why can't you read 30 books a year? Because time is running out. And so if we really look at fundamentally this third kind of optimizer, if you want to stop being an optimizer bot, if you want actual peace and contentment, which, by the way, is something that the first two optimizers don't really get, right? So the peace and contentment comes when optimization is a means to an end. The target is already set, and the achievement of the target will bring you, hopefully, peace, happiness, contentment. This is I'm trying to optimize because I want to get a PS5 before this particular game comes out, before the Fable remaster comes out, whatever, right? And then once you get the Fable remaster, hopefully, fingers crossed, you're happy with it, right? But this third group of people, what they fundamentally are concerned with is a lack of time. I want to do more. Why do I want to date more people? Why am I so interested in polyamory? Because this experience is limited. And what I want is I want to get closer to an unlimited experience. There's so many books to read. I can't read them all. I want to read more. I want to read more. I want to read more. And what does this boil down to? It boils down to a fear of death. Now, this is one of the fundamental 4 fears I think that the Buddha talked about. Other people in the karmic traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, will talk about the fear of death as being fundamental. Some groups of people believe that conquering the fear of death will conquer all of your fears, because it is the most fundamental fear that human beings have. This is also true in Western psychology as well. There are many like psychoanalytic thinkers who will sort of really focus on the fear of death as the root of all anxiety, because death and the limitation of time is how we as human beings are limited. So conquering that fear, accepting that life on this earth is limited, that you don't get to do everything. See, it is the panic to try to do everything that turns you into the optimizer bot. I need to do more. 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 You can't do it all. This is also where FOMO comes from, right? Fear of missing out. Missing out on what? This experience. Why are you not content with the experience that you have? And so you can try to increase the numerator as much as you want to, but that denominator is ticking, 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 and it is terrifyingly ticking. And no amount of optimization will stop the march of time. No way to beat death. And so once you start to grapple with that directly, right? My time on this earth is limited. And so the optimizer will say, but I want to make the most of it, which is good. There's a good logic there, and I encourage you to make the most of it. But here's the tricky thing. Making the most of it is not necessarily more. Because once you understand the difference, then you'll understand, right? So think on that. Meditate upon that. Existential dread setting in, good. Existential dread setting in, it's not setting in, it's coming up, right? Setting in implies it's coming from the outside. No, it's coming up. And that existential dread is there. It needs to be worked through. And so generally speaking, when it comes to optimizers, these are the 3 major psychological patterns that I see for optimizer bots. And for the rest of you who are using optimization because you already have a goal in mind, which hopefully will lead to peace and contentment, then go for it, right? But optimize with awareness. Don't just do it automatically. I need more. Why? Right? Because it's never going to work.
Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.
Okay, let's talk about making a hobby your whole personality.
People try a hobby. They choose one. Unbelievable. They Google it once, they buy the basic starter kit like a normal person, book a weekly session, stick to it, and slowly improve over time. Imagine doing something without it turning into a personality, a lifestyle, and a 3-year business plan by lunchtime. ADHD people try a hobby, and it's a full personality shift that can last anywhere between 4 minutes and 7 business days. Because we don't collect hobbies, we're collecting possible lives. Every time we pick something up or try something new, what we're actually doing is running a deep psychological experiment that's called, could this finally be the life that fits me? Last week, I tried yoga for the first time, and the instructor said, I can't believe that this is your first class. The next thing you know, I'm searching if I could realistically move me and my dog to Bali for £1.85 and become a wellness instructor because her comment made me feel something.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. There are times where we run into stuff. Could this be me? And there are a lot of good reasons for that, right? Because I think like most human beings feel out of place. And we look around and there's this idea of like finding your tribe. Like I remember when I was in medical school. So when I went to medical school, I was going to become an oncologist. My dad was an oncologist. He was an amazing oncologist, was one of the seminal researchers in something called graft versus host disease, was at MD Anderson, which is one of the best cancer institutions in the world, came from India, was just an amazing doctor. And so I saw my amazing doctor dad. I saw how his patients treated him with so much respect. I saw how much money he made. And like MD Anderson is gigantic. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to be some like allergist, like helping people sneeze less. I'm going to cure lives. Cure cancer, save lives. Then I went to medical school and I had a real problem. See, on my psychiatry rotation, there was something called Schindel time. And Schindel time was named after a particular psychiatrist who worked there. This psychiatrist would come and he would like sit with a group of medical students in a room. And the problem was that like he wasn't teaching us anything. We'd just be in a room with him for 1 hour a week. And we didn't understand what we were doing there. And we were like, oh my God, this guy's going to like psychoanalyze us. And so like everyone goes into the room. He doesn't make an introduction. He comes into the room and he's just quiet. And so we're like, oh shit, it's happening. These fucking psychiatrists analyzing us. He's sitting in silence. We all know he's sitting in silence. He knows he's sitting in silence. He hasn't told us what we're doing here. We don't know what we're doing here. We've heard legends and myths of this kind of thing from the senior students. We'll even ask them, what are they actually doing? And they're like, we don't really know. Some people will be like, it's a waste of time. Like, it's like, whatever. So during Schindel time, he makes some effort at conversation, but people are quiet because like, we ain't going to let you psychoanalyze us, bruh. Then he's got an apple. Starts eating his apple. And he's just sitting there and he's eating his apple. We're like, this is some experiment, bruh. This is some experiment. This is the moment I decided to become a psychiatrist. I didn't realize it yet. And then he eats this apple and he eats down to the core of the apple. And then he does something insane. He eats the core of the apple. There's just a little bit of an apple left. He takes it and he eats half of it. He's like, just bites and then he chews the seeds and he swallows the seeds. And the whole room is like, what, dude? You cannot do that. What are you doing? And then he's like, what? And then he eats the remainder of the apple. And then he's got the stem and everyone's like, bruh, what are you doing? And he's like, what? And then he eats the stem and everyone's like, oh my God. And they're like, don't you know that apple seeds have cyanide, bro? We're in medical school, man. Cyanide kills you. And he's like, really? They've got cyanide? And then he just like pops the tension in the room. And then everyone is talking. We can't help them ourselves. And we become outplayed by this guy who we knew he was going to get us to talk. We fucking knew he was going to get us to talk. We weren't going to talk. He's going to be silent. I'm going to be silent too. And we become outplayed by this guy. guy who we knew he was going to get us to talk. We fucking knew he was going to get us to talk. We weren't going to talk. He's going to be silent. I'm going to be silent too. And this guy just eats an apple. GG, game over. And so I was like amazed. I was like, what was that? What was that? And then, I went to go meet the guy, and then so I found my tribe. And so here's the scary thing is in life, we have this idea that people find their tribe, and that's what we're looking for. And this lady is talking about ADHD. And I think one of the problems with ADHD is everyone's like, people with ADHD do this. This does happen to people with ADHD. Now, let's understand why. It doesn't happen exclusively with them, but let's talk about this idea of this hobby is my life. So I fell in love with psychiatry, and we're all looking for that thing to fall in love with. Now, here's the first thing to understand. If you want to find the thing that you want to fall in love with, the first thing is if you are looking to find the thing that you are falling in love with, the chances are you won't fall in love with it. I hate to say this. This is anecdotal evidence. As a psychiatrist, I decided to be celibate, met my wife. Decided to be a real doctor, save lives and cure cancer, fell in love with psychiatry. See, when we are looking for something, we're so hungry for it. Give it, is it this, is it this, is it this? And we get just an inkling of something, right? We're like, oh my God, is this the thing that I want to do? You just get a touch of it, and you're like, oh, finally I found it. Oh my God. And then what happens? It turns out to not be your thing. You abandon that hobby. You're not a chess person. So then what happens? The looking gets more frantic. Oh my God, that's not my thing, and that's not my thing, and that's not my thing. Please let this be my thing. And so the moment that something nice happens, you're like, oh, I get a little bit excited. This is me. Finally, I found the thing. You guys see how the hunger becomes a cognitive bias. It becomes rose-tinted glasses. The more desperate we are to find something, we get so excited. And that's where the ADHD comes in, because people with ADHD are more vulnerable to that. They're more vulnerable to the emotional fluctuations. There are other reasons too. But let's start with this idea of, if I'm hungry for something, if I'm looking for something and I get some sign of it, because here's the thing, remember, I haven't found my tribe. I haven't found my personality. So I don't know what it is to have a personality. So if I don't know what love is, and then it's kind of like that, the butterfly meme of is this love? We don't know yet, right? Because we haven't found ourselves. So we don't know what finding ourselves looks like. Therefore, we will look at something and we'll think, oh, this is finding myself, but it's not. It's just what we think finding ourselves looks like. In my experience, finding yourself is usually done kicking and screaming. You're dragged to it, right? It's an uphill battle, not something, well, not always. That's what's so weird, is it's kind of an uphill battle, but it feels so natural. Despite making literally 1,000 YouTube videos, it seems like people are still struggling with focus and motivation. And that's why we're launching a Doing Stuff bundle. It starts with Dr. K's Guide to ADHD, which breaks down the science behind picking a task and actually following through with it. We're also including an action-focused planner, a meditation journal, and access to our meditation tracks feature, which helps people develop a personalized meditation practice that they can stick with over time. Because progress comes from actually doing stuff, not just watching content. So check out the bundle below. So that's the first thing. Second thing, why are we so hungry for this hobby to be our life? Let's understand what your life is, what your perception of your life is. Now we're going to talk about ADHD because I think it's a beautiful example. I'm going to be this kind of person. What does that mean? Neuroscientifically, developmentally, cognitively, developmentally, psychologically. Who we are is a string of emotional experiences integrated into a narrative. So if I talk about my life, I have this story about Schindel time, right? That was a seminal moment for me. And what makes it a seminal moment? The emotion of that moment. I was blown away. So your life is not having chicken salad sandwich every day for 30 years. It is the emotional experiences. We string them together into a narrative, and that is who we are. Now, if you have ADHD, this becomes a real problem because chances are your emotional experiences were negative in nature. You were getting in trouble at school. You were getting yelled at by your parents. You were not getting invited to birthday parties. So then what happens is you develop an identity. And this is why there's a great study of comorbidity between ADHD and depression, where if you look at the causal relationship between these two things, 3% of people who are diagnosed with major depressive disorder will grow up to have ADHD, or of the people who have both, 3% had the depression first, then developed ADHD. 70% of people who had ADHD will develop depression of a comorbid population. Now, every time I have a patient who's being evaluated for ADHD, one of the first things that I do in the initial intake is rule out depression. They have depression until proven otherwise. That is now my default assumption as a clinician. So the identity that you develop is not a good one, right? There's one common exception to this, which is the class clown. So oftentimes we'll develop an identity of being a funny person. I remember when I was in the 3rd grade, I had trouble making friends and stuff. So what I would do is put a pair of underwear on my head and I'd run around and I'd talk in funny accents, and then the kids would like me. So you develop this identity. Oh, I'm the class clown. And then as you grow up as an adult, that kind of thing doesn't really work when you're like 43. So you have to do something else. So now we're looking for a new identity. And then we see a hobby. And we see people who do, oh, I want to be that kind of person. Because if I find that kind of person, if this is my thing, then first of all, if this is my thing, then it'll solve my motivational problems. It'll solve my follow-through problems, because I have all these problems of follow-through and motivation, and I leave things behind. But if I find my thing, there's a thing out there that'll fix all of those motivational problems for me. Oh my God, I hope it's this one. The problem is that ADHD brain is vulnerable to this whole cycle. It's vulnerable to the emotional impact of not having found your thing. You have this identity of being a little bit depressed, not having found your people. But man, sometimes when neurodivergent kids get together, they get along really, really well. And they also get really frustrated with each other, but they fit. I have one kid who's probably neurodivergent, has one friend who's definitely neurodivergent, and they get along really well. But they also have a lot of conflict. It's really weird. They always want to see each other, but even then, like every time they have a play date, there'll be like an hour where they're just in separate rooms doing things on their own, but they like it, right? So we're sensitive to excitement, right? When we get excited, we're like, oh my God, this is the thing, this is the thing, this is the thing. We've looked for the thing for so long, so we're hungry for the thing, and we find it, we hope it's the thing. And then there's the allure that if this is the thing, then it'll solve my ADHD problems. I won't be that kid who I used to be, who didn't follow through with things, who abandoned projects. This thing will be different. And so we want to adopt it whole scale. We want to make it our personality. It becomes our identity. It does not become a hobby. It becomes an identity. Now, what do you do about this? I think the first thing is to recognize. So always, 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 if you ever want to break free of a pattern, the first thing is to recognize the pattern. Now, a lot of people will say, I know the pattern. I don't think so. Overwhelmingly, in my experience as a psychiatrist, people have an understanding of the pattern, but they usually miss critical elements. And there's some very interesting sort of like theory of medicine around this. So if you look at sort of like the scientific study of like how people heal, people solve their problems. Very few human beings do not solve their problems. The reason that problems don't get solved is because they don't understand how to solve them. Their understanding of the problem is incorrect. So most human beings, if they have a problem in life, it's not a lack of treatment, it's an improper diagnosis. Their understanding of the problem is incorrect, which is why our job as psychiatrists is to help them understand. I'll give you all a really simple example of this. Most people think that addictions are problems. Patient comes into my office, says, oh my God, I gotta stop drinking alcohol. I gotta stop smoking weed. Weed is ruining my life in this way, and 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 this way. I gotta stop, I gotta stop, I gotta stop, I gotta stop. They see it as a problem. So what is my job? What does weed do for you? Let's not talk about the problems. Let's talk about the problems it fixes. Let's talk about weed as a solution, not as a bad thing, as a good thing. Because the reason we get addicted to weed is not because of the problems that it causes. We get addicted to weed because of the problems it solves. But we don't see it that way. Sometimes we do, right? There's the pothead advocate. Weed is great, man. I function fine. I do great. It enhances my life. There's no downsides. It's natural. It's better than alcohol. Alcohol causes more deaths than weed. You can't overdose on weed. You know, there's the pothead, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? The pothead canned argument, you know, the party line, the party propaganda. And those people are sometimes in denial. There's something that we call pre-contemplative about the negative effects of weed. And I'm not saying that it isn't great in many ways. like I said, it solves problems, right? So if you want to break out of this pattern, first thing is to understand the pattern, observe the pattern. Notice that I'm getting excited. If you've got ADHD, the most important skill that I teach people, I say most important all the time. I don't know if that's actually the most important. The most underrated skill that I try to teach all of my patients with ADHD, everyone wants to control their negative emotions. They want to manage their negative emotions. Learn to manage your positive emotions. Managing your excitement is the most underrated skill in ADHD. And why is that important? Because we already talked about where does that anxiety come from? Excitement come from, right? I want to be this. I want to be this. I want to be this. It's going to create a cognitive bias. The brightest flame burns out the fastest. This is the problem in ADHD. Don't make it your personality. Keep it as a hobby, right? Because the problem is we go from nothing to everything. There's no in between. And then we run out of steam. We burn up our excitement. And here's the neuroscience behind this, okay? If we look at the part of our brain that ultimately dictates our behavior, right? So we have our motivational center of the brain. This part of the brain gets inputs from other parts of the brain. It gets inputs from some parts of our frontal lobe, which are doing planning, like long-term planning. They're like, this part of our brain is like, we should do this because 5 years from now, it'll help us in this way. Then we have another part of our brain, the nucleus accumbens, right? That's going to go there and it's going to be like dopamine, bro. Like, let's do this because it's fun. Then we have another part of our brain, the amygdala, the limbic system. This is the emotional part of our brain. This is the part of our brain that tells us to do something. Like roller coasters are fun. Dopamine or nucleus accumbens is like, let's do it. But the amygdala is like, they're also scary, so let's not do it. Frontal lobe is like, let's not go to the theme park today because we have a test on Monday. All of these parts have inputs into this motivational center that makes this calculation, and then it makes a decision. Now, the tricky thing about controlling your motivation, controlling your behavior, each of these voices, frontal lobes, nucleus accumbens, and limbic system, planning, long-term planning, each of these has a different weight. Like one of them gets 10 votes, one of them gets 10 votes, the other one gets 20 votes. What determines the weight of these factions, the strength of these factions, is how much you listen to them, just like in the real world, right? If you're the dictator and you've got 3 advisors and there's one advisor that you listen to over and over and over again, that advisor is going to get stronger. So the reason people have difficulty with follow through with ADHD is because when they get excited, it heavily influences my behavior. Therefore, my behavior depends on my excitement. And if it depends on my excitement, when the excitement wanes, the behavior disappears. This is why we start things and stop things. It's actually not about dopamine, right? Everyone thinks it's about dopamine. Nucleus accumbens is just one part of the brain. Dopamine is one neurotransmitter. Ventral tegmental area is just one part of the brain. There's lots of other parts of the brain. And because we live in a world where there's short-form content, we tend to reduce and simplify things. And that's why people with ADHD struggle so much, because the truth is your brain is not all one way. The truth is that your brain is a complex organ, quite possibly the most complex organ on the planet. And there are many things that influence your behavior. So be careful. Modulate your excitement. Learn to rein it in. It'll last longer and you will become less dependent on it. Then a hobby remains a hobby. And then we get to the second problem, which is if my hobby is a hobby, holy crap, Dr. K, then it's not my identity. Then what is my identity? Excellent question. That is a question that you should answer through working through the question, not find a brewing kit and then suddenly the answer is found, right? Answer the question, do the work, like show your work, like in mathematics. Who do you think you are right now? Where did you get that idea of who you are? Who would you like to be? What can you do to become that person, right? And this is where I would encourage y'all to scale back a little bit. Don't focus so much on the end goal. Who do you want to be today? Do you want to be someone who reads this book or plays, you take your pick of game, right? So who you are, I mean, there's this narrative sense of identity that we talked about, integral emotional experiences, which is there. But then a big part of that, this is what I think what people don't understand, is that emotional experiences are not always big experiences. Sometimes they're very small ones. Like I remember a big one for me is when I first moved to Boston, I didn't have a car. I didn't have much money. So I stayed at a place that was not the best location. And I had access to public transport only. And so I had to walk. I had to change buses 2 times to get to a grocery store. because I wasn't on a good public transport kind of line. So I used to walk for 45 minutes because taking the bus was basically the same amount of time or even longer. The bus would run every 30 minutes. This bus runs every 30 minutes. And then the other bus, sometimes I miss, and then I have to wait there for 30 minutes. So I just walk for 45 minutes every time I went to the grocery store. One-way trip is 45 minutes. I'd have to lug groceries back. Those are the kinds of little things that made me the person that I am. It's little things, right? So when you look at the person that you are today, what are you upset with? Oh, I'm a loser. I waste my time. I don't do anything with my free time. I just doom scroll. I'm a black pillar. I'm an incel. I'm a That can be changed. You don't have to doom scroll right this moment, but it's hard. Yes. What does hard mean? Hard means that circuit in your brain is underdeveloped. That means that it's an advisor that you have not listened to. And there's something really cool. Once you start doing it, see, somewhere along the way, I don't know when this happened, hard became a bad thing. You guys notice this? That somewhere along the way, when things became hard, we tried to find solutions to make it easier instead of doing the hard thing. In the moment that we did that, like it's efficient, right? The moment we did that, we ran into a very, very scary biological wall, which is that the human body strengthens through hardship and weakens through ease. The elevator doesn't give us gigantic quads. The stairs do. And we tried to make, when things became hard for us, we accommodated that difficulty instead of rising up to it. Fundamentally, this is what I think is like wrong in the world. When things became hard, we said, okay, let's make it easier for you. And if you look at like product development, right? People talk about capitalism like it's an evil thing. I think it's humans who are to blame. But products make things easier for you. Oh, we'll get it to you. You don't even have to think, oh my God, we've got 2-hour delivery now. Like, this is insane. I went to India recently. They don't even have 2-hour delivery. They have 15-minute delivery. I was on New Year's Day. Is 1:30 in the morning, and I was at a New Year's party, and someone shows me these two big delivery apps, Zomato and Blinkit. And he's like, yeah, you can get whatever you want within 15 minutes. And I was just looking at it. And it's like, I can order a blender at 1:30 in the morning on New Year's Day, and it'll be at this guy's flat in 15 minutes. Like, oh, bruh, planning? You don't need to do that. Just be impulsive. We can manage your impulses. We can accommodate your impulsiveness. Oh, you feel like you forgot to get a blender and you want to make a smoothie? We'll take care of it for you. We've started to make life so easy for ourselves, right? There's so many cars everywhere, and we're like becoming obese. We're not hauling groceries for 45 minutes anymore. We're getting them delivered to our doorstep. And then we have to compensate as human beings. Since I'm not moving, now I have to go to the gym and uselessly just lift weight like this, just over and over and over again. What are you doing? I'm accommodating for the fact that I sit in this chair all day. Like, this is what our life has become. It's so weird. You guys notice this? When things became hard for us, we said, that's okay. Don't do it. We'll make it easy for you. And what do we all want? We all want things to be easy. Creepy. Like, even when I do it, I'm laughing a little bit on the inside, so it's a little bit less creepy. But do y'all see how when someone has a blunted affect, they can't be reciprocal? And what I see so much on the internet is a lack of being reciprocal. So either we overinvest and chase people too much, or they will ask.
Alpha male has dominated media. We've been told that in animals and in human society, the toughest,
it is evolutional,
the most aggressive top dog gets the power, the resources, the mates.
biological.
Told to stop being beta, to be the fearless leader of the pack. Take the red pill, and you can be an alpha too.
The only alpha they respond to is me.
The alpha male is an idea that was born in real studies of animal behavior and biology in the lives and conflicts of social animals. Few scientific concepts have been so thoroughly absorbed by popular culture, but this idea has been so hugely misinterpreted and disconnected from what the science actually says, which is part of why I, as a biologist and as a man, want to address it, because the real story of how animals wield power and influence and how social success actually plays out in the animal kingdom even in our closest relatives, can teach us a lot about how to be better humans. But to do that, we have to find the truth. This is the real science of alphas. Hey smart people, Joe here. Imagine a wolf pack, deadly and powerful predators, and at the helm, the alpha wolf. Aggressive, teeth bared, maintaining power through force and strength. That's complete. To figure out why our idea of alphas is wrong, we have to actually go back and understand where it comes from. The alpha male is a surprisingly recent concept. People only began to widely use this term around 1970. But to understand what happened here, we have to go back here. The roots of the whole alpha idea start in the early 1900s, and this young Norwegian scientist, Thorleif Skjelderup Ebbe, that might be the most Norwegian name ever. Anyway, when he's like 9 or 10 years old, he starts doing scientific observations of his pet chickens, and he realizes that there's politics happening in a chicken coop. He writes a paper about how some chickens always peck certain other chickens, and certain other chickens are always just the ones getting pecked. There was a social order where different chickens ranked one above the other according to status, what scientists call a dominance hierarchy. If you've ever heard someone use the term pecking order, this is the origin of that term. So you can only have a hierarchy, this ranking of status, in animals that live in groups and are social. So it's worth having a short detour to ask, why are some animals social in the first place? Animals can group together for a lot of different reasons that aren't necessarily social. Zebras and wildebeest might get together, but that's not because they're being social with each other. It's just that that's where the grass is. So when does a group of animals become social? For that to happen, the individuals in a species who are selfish and non-social, they have to end up doing worse than the individuals who cooperate. Maybe working together helps them collect more resources. Maybe it's being better able to defend each other against predators. But in the end, natural selection decides that cooperating and being social is an advantage. The social animals reproduce more, and so that species becomes more social. Not quite every social animal creates one of those ladders of social status, a dominance hierarchy, but they are surprisingly widespread. From puppies to meerkats to geese, they're everywhere. But there was one special animal that made the idea of top dog famous. So in the 1940s, this Swiss scientist named Rudolf Schenkel wants to understand more about wolf social lives. Like, how does a wolf pack even work? The problem is, in the 1940s, wolves are basically extinct in the wild. Why? If you guessed because we killed them, you are right. The only wolves that Schenkel can find are at the zoo in Basel, Switzerland. So he spends years watching these wolves, and in 1947 writes this paper. On page 11, he writes that the top male and top female pair defend their social position by incessant control and repression of all types of competition within the same sex. And right here, in this handwritten note, he calls them alpha animals. This is it. This is where the concept of alpha males and alpha females is born. I have to say, it's very cool to find like the actual paper where someone writes something down like this for the first time. But it wasn't until 20 or so years later that the term alpha male enters popular culture, thanks to this best-selling book, The Wolf, by this guy.
My name is Dave Meach. I've been studying wolves since 1958. So Schenkel just figured, well, a pack is a bunch of wolves. And when I published my 1970 book, which ended up being a bestseller, in that book, I cited his studies and indicated that the top-ranking member of a pack was an alpha male and the top-ranking female was the alpha female. So I have been either credited or blamed for perhaps promoting that idea.
Now, Meach's book contains basically everything we knew about wolves at that time. And because it's so popular, it launches the alpha male concept into culture. And that idea, the alpha male, it lands in this world that's full of industry, corporate ladders, sports, political drama, military conflict, and a generation who had very loudly been questioning all of those hierarchies. As the alpha male concept begins to get attention, there was just one problem. Schenkel's whole idea of alpha wolves dominating by force and conflict was fundamentally flawed.
Rudolf Schenkel knew they lived in packs but didn't know what a pack was. So he put a bunch of wolves from various zoos in captive situations together and made his own artificial pack, thinking it was an actual pack like you'd find in the wild, which it wasn't.
But around this time, wild wolf populations are starting to recover. So Meach continues observing wild wolves and discovers something that completely flips the script.
It became apparent to me that a wolf pack was actually a family. That idea of wolves fighting to get to the top of a dominance hierarchy was actually not valid.
This was a huge shift in our understanding of wolves. A pack is not a hierarchy of dominance and conflict and power struggles. Wolf packs are simply families, and the alpha male and female are just the parents. Throwing a bunch of unrelated wolves together in a cage is basically the wolf equivalent of prison culture. So, of course they used aggression and violence to gain dominance. I don't think we would look at human prisons and say, that's what we want to model human nature off of, right? In a natural pack, there's no battle for the throne. Young wolves don't challenge the parents for dominance. They just leave when they grow up and they go start their own packs. Labeling parents as alphas makes no sense. I mean, at the very least, it doesn't help us understand wolves better. I mean, do we call a doe an alpha deer just because she has a fawn? Would you call your dad or mom the alpha of the family?
Why are we actually giving such a, quote, power to these individuals by calling them alphas when all they are is, parents of the pups?
And it turns out that the alpha male wasn't even always the one leading the pack. When the pups are young and being nursed by the female, the male brings her food. He attends to her.
So during those first 8 or 9 weeks or so of the pup's life, the female is clearly dominant to that male.
And this even extends to hunting and protection.
When a muskox came up to a den of pups while I was studying them, it was really the female that tended to be the most protective of the pups.
Meach and other biologists tried to correct the record with this new science. But this is a case where that book and its outdated image of a wolf pack had already morphed into a cultural meme that was beyond their control. In 1982, Dutch primatologist Frans de Waal published the book Chimpanzee Politics. De Waal's idea was that if we wanted to look at other animals to learn about dominance and hierarchies and maybe how they apply to humans, we should look at our closest relative. Chimpanzee Politics explored how chimpanzees angle for power and influence. It became an instant classic, pouring gas on the fire of the popular idea of the alpha male. Former Speaker of the U.S. House, Newt Gingrich, even handed out copies of it in Congress. That explains a lot. From that point to today, when people talk about an alpha male, they usually mean a kind of bully, someone who's loud, aggressive, always dominating, constantly proving he's the boss. But this completely gets the science wrong again.
It's a complete mess, sort of. If you look at YouTube or whatever, there isn't a lot of good information out there about dominance or alpha males. Almost none of that material is grounded in our understanding based in animal behavior.
Aaron studies the social lives and emotions of chimpanzees and other apes.
I think what interests me most about chimpanzees is their similarity to humans. They are one of our closest living relatives. Chimpanzees and bonobos are the two animals that are more similar to humans than any other species.
How similar? Well, chimps and their cousins, bonobos, they share about 98.7% of their DNA with humans. And they share 99.6% of their DNA with each other.
A lot of the reason that chimpanzees are useful for studying human behavior is that we are apes.
Like all other primates, chimpanzees live in groups with deep social connections. A chimp community can range from just around a dozen to over 100 individuals. Male chimps will stay in a group their whole life. They stay close to mom until they're about 10. Then they join the older males and do guy stuff. Female chimps typically leave the group they grew up with when they're teenagers. They join another group and spend the rest of their life there. Now, wolf packs, remember, are really just families. But
so with chimpanzees, they seem to have a really clear dominance hierarchy, especially among the adult males. And all the adult male chimpanzees in a community have a sense of where they fall relative to other adult males.
This dominance sort of takes shape through charging, chasing, and slapping each other, kind of like a game of chimpanzee playground tag.
It's usually the threat of force, and then they'll sort of indicate submission or deference through the pant grunt, this grunting, panting noise.
And usually one male chimpanzee holds the highest rank, the alpha male. He never makes a submission grunt to any other male. But what is all this quest for dominance even for? Unsurprisingly, a lot of it is about romance. Or, in scientist speak,
the higher ranking adult male chimpanzees do tend to mate more with females and to reproduce more with females.
But that's not the only hierarchy in chimp societies, right? There may be completely different hierarchies for who gets to sleep where, or who gets access to food. There's not just one top male in every situation. Being an alpha male, if you're an ape, which we are, is not a personality trait. Who has power, who has influence, and who ranks where? It depends on the situation that you're talking about, and it is rarely just about physical strength or control.
If you watch like YouTube videos or the way kids are talking about it in high school or college.
The strength is even a way to try and not be weak.
Because men are the backbone of the slave force.
We've evolved for the hierarchy.
That's not how it's meant to be used in animal behavior. It's not a personality trait, it's a relationship. And it doesn't necessarily relate to other behaviors like leadership. In chimpanzees, the alpha is not the leader. He's just the highest ranking male. You have other chimps who might be leaders, for example, and protecting the group and going on these territorial excursions. And I think that primatologists sort of got focused on dominance because it was something that we could measure pretty easily.
One of the remarkable things about chimpanzees is that they form these really strong and enduring social bonds with other chimps.
If I were to think about what makes a successful male chimpanzee, it wouldn't be, are you the alpha? And it wouldn't necessarily be, are you even high ranking? Although that might help. It would really be about, do you have a friend? Are you connected to other individuals in the community? If a female doesn't leave at adolescence and she stays in her community, sometimes she'll stay in sort of the neighborhood that she grew up in, and she can develop a really strong relationship with her mother throughout adulthood. These are like the strongest relationships you see in chimpanzees. They're often inseparable, really amazing to watch. The second strongest relationship in adult chimpanzees is between adult male chimpanzees, where they have these friendly, cooperative relationships. They spend time traveling together, sitting together, grooming with each other, and sometimes they last over 5 or even over 10 years. If you have a friendship that lasts 5 or 10 years, I mean, that's longer than many marriages in humans.
Scientists think these friendships between male chimpanzees most closely resemble the pair bonds that we see between human mates.
Like a lot of primatologists notice, okay, they study these strong same-sex relationships between male primates. You see this in some other species too, and sometimes they call these bromances, but I think they're romances. Just call them what they are, they're romances.
Becoming an alpha male chimpanzee is not only about being strong and powerful. The most influential males also have to be generous. They show empathy. They resolve conflict. They bring food to other chimpanzees. They'll play with the babies. They'll engage with the females. Male chimpanzees spend a lot of time building goodwill and favor with a lot of other chimps when they're trying to move up the hierarchy. And we can't overlook bonobos. They're just as closely related to us as chimps are. In bonobo societies, the dominant individual is often a female. And among bonobos, conflict isn't resolved with strength or aggression. They resolve conflict with sex. So yes, tons of animals construct these social ranking systems, but this simplistic view of dominance by aggression and strength and control is pulled from bad science. And our closest relatives prove that is not the only way, or even the best way, to gain influence and power. Ultimately, the very scientists who introduced the idea of the alpha male being this king of aggression and dominance, being the top wolf, has had to fight for decades to get the actual truth out there.
Not just interesting, but frustrating. I keep having to answer questions about things that I published in 1970, which are not right, you know. I think mainly as a result of the publicity that was coming out about this whole alpha business. And that's when I thought, I really should try to get this thing out of print.
Today, the very book that birthed the idea of the alpha male in popular culture is no longer being printed because the author had enough humility to know that the science had to be corrected.
I think that it's very important for any scientist to reflect on their own work, and we correct ourselves. If we don't, someone else does.
I mean, one interesting thing about humans, we love to look at other animals to sort of understand our behavior, but we can also study humans to understand humans. And people who study humans across cultures and in a range of cultures.
But the question here really is like, can he get up and walk around and heal and be the emperor he was back in the Great Crusade? It's very much on the edge of accepted thinking.
The Primarch reborn demands the impossible.
Hiya, welcome back to IGN. I am Arbiterian. I talk about Warhammer on the internet, and we are here today to attempt to explain some of Warhammer's greatest mysteries.
Unyielding against the darkness. We are the Emperor's angels.
Starting with a really big one. What was the deal that the Emperor made with the Dark Gods on Molech? This is a good place to start because it's arguably the biggest mystery in the whole of 40k. The Emperor of Mankind, way before he rose and formed the Imperium, before he created Primarchs or Space Marines, journeyed to a planet called Molech. This was pre-Imperium, in the days of generation ships and humanity spreading out into the cosmos. And on that planet, he found a portal into the warp where he went in and came out way more powerful. And he's known to have visited it again way later when he'd made the Primarchs and built the Space Marine Legions and started to unify humanity. And we also know that Horus went in there too when he was preparing to fight the Emperor, and he also got a massive power-up, but we don't know if it's the same one. So, what happened? What did the Emperor actually do in there is up for debate. We know that the Emperor was a lot more powerful. He came out with something people call mastery of the warp, which could be a number of different things. Many demons in the setting, when complaining about this, will say that the Emperor did a deal or signed some sort of pact with the forces of chaos, with the forces of the warp, and then went back on that deal, tried to trick them and eliminate them from human society. That's how demons phrase it, but demons are often trying to get people to do what they want. They don't necessarily tell the truth, so we don't know if that's true. People on the Emperor's side talk about it. It's often spoken about as if the Emperor was stealing fire from the gods, like Prometheus in the Greek myths, that he went in and got something, not that he did a deal with them. So the mystery of what exactly the deal was, or if there was a deal, or what specifically he got, has never been resolved, and I think maybe might not ever be resolved because it's so central to kind of who was right back then. Big mystery, right? Hard to answer. What happened to the two missing Primarchs and their legions? Why won't the Imperium talk about it? And why is the truth never explained by the traitors who, you know, I imagine don't really care what they're allowed to talk about? There were 20 legions of Space Marines created by the Emperor to go off onto the Great Crusade. And we know that by the time of the Horus Heresy, there were only 18 remaining. Only 18 Primarchs and only 18 legions. So 2 of them disappeared. And then, like, way later, there was a Horus Heresy. After the Horus Heresy, the legions got split up into chapters of Space Marines, each 1,000 strong. So that's why there are so many chapters. But what happened to the 2 missing legions? It's one of those things that is littered throughout the lore, and you can piece together a few different stories. No one's completely sure. Obviously, it's something that was considered pretty bad at the time, because we still remember who sided with Horus in the heresy, and we don't remember at all about the 2 missing Primarchs. The reason no one talks about it is pretty simple. When the 2 missing Primarchs were removed or killed or died or were lost, the other Primarchs had their memories erased or locked. And we see in some of the short stories that when they're briefly given those memories back, they then agree that, yeah, definitely shouldn't remember that. Very, very dangerous. Lock my mind again. So we can assume that the reason no one talks about it is because they physically can't. They all took some decision to not be able to remember it. And that's a really interesting reaction. One of the vague theories hinted at, one of them, or both of them maybe, was involved in this massive war really early in the Imperium's history called the Rangdan Xenocides. As the Imperium was growing and just trying to establish itself in the galaxy, other alien empires were trying to do the same. One of them was this empire called the Rangda, and the Rangda are known to have employed like brain-altering technology of some sort of mind control maybe. Again, they're only ever hinted at, but a lot of the names of their units or their weapons are called something like cerebrivore. And also there are redacted accounts that seem to imply that entire legions were lost in that war. So one theory is that the two lost Primarchs, one of them or both of them, were involved in that war, were maybe killed in that war, and that was considered very shameful or bad for morale or propaganda, and therefore it was never mentioned. Basically, they're a permanent mystery that no one's ever resolved, and the lore has been written so that it can't be, which creates, room for mystery within the galaxy. Outside the lore, of course, this is a great example of the sort of thing in 40k that is deliberately left vague, either to just create mystery in the setting, because real history has tons of plot holes and mysteries and things that we can't remember, or just to give the players more room to do what they want with their armies. The original two Lost Legions are a reference to the Lost Roman Legions. That's where they originally came from. They've never been filled in because I think it allows the players to invent their own answers to those questions. Where did Constantin Valdor go, and what's he up to? So, Constantin Valdor was the Captain General of the Legio Custodes during the Horus Heresy and the Great Crusade. He's arguably one of the first custodians ever created by the Emperor. He's kind of the Emperor's right-hand man. He's the main bodyguard of the Emperor, and he's a really, really high-ranking figure in the Imperial court during the Great Crusade period and the Horus Heresy. After the siege, we don't see him anymore. He doesn't die. He finds the Emperor's body barely alive after his battle with Horus. He returns to the Emperor's palace, but then all records stop, and we don't know what's happened to him. On the other hand, way later in the 41st millennium, there are rumors that he is behind a thing called the City of Dust. It seems it's unresolved because this is a trilogy of books that haven't been finished, but in the Bequin trilogy, which itself is a sequel to the Ravenna trilogy, which itself is a sequel to the Eisenhorn trilogy, all written by Dan Abnett. It's a lot of books. In the Bequin trilogy, there is a mysterious city on a mysterious planet which links to a sort of warp realm, we think, and the warp realm seems to maybe involve a character called Valdor. And that's all the information we have so far. Everyone's eagerly awaiting the third book in the Bequin trilogy so that we can figure out if that's a red herring or if Constantin Valdor is actually going to be involved again. What is in the Dark Cells of Terror? So this is another one of those things that is spread across various parts of the lore. The Dark Cells are some very, very high security, also quite spooky prison cells, very, very deep beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, which is Earth. And the Dark Cells are cells that were used to house ancient enemies that the Emperor found during the Great Crusade and maybe even before that. Like, these aren't necessarily physical things. They could be really weird apparitions or stuff that isn't really alive. They all have names like the Slithering Dreamer and the Eater of Gods. And these cells are guarded by a specific shield host of the Adeptus Custodes called the Shadow Keepers. Also, linking into one of the previous questions, one of the things listed as being in the Dark Cells is something called Subject 11. And one of those two lost Primarchs was the 11th one. So maybe there's a link there. Can the Emperor be resurrected? Interesting question, right? Because that presupposes he's dead. The Emperor fought Horus in the final battle of the Horus Heresy, aboard Horus's battle barge. He vanquished Horus, but he was mortally wounded and then returned to the Golden Throne under, I suppose, the Imperial Palace on Terra, from whence he does a few jobs. He maintains the Astronomicon. He holds shut a horrific warp portal under Terra. If he wasn't there to do that, then hordes of demons would pour through, which is very bad. And while doing that, and while being the focus for millennia of worship, he sort of ascended into being a bit of a warp entity able to maybe grant miracles. We're not 100% sure on who's doing that. Questionable first if the thing on the throne is considered to be alive or considered to be dead. Obviously, the traitors to the Imperium would call him the Corpse Emperor because they think of him as being a corpse. But the question here really is like, can he get up and walk around and heal and be the Emperor he was back in the Great Crusade? It's a mystery in the setting, like all these questions. In the setting, there are quite a lot of sects who believe in resurrectionism, particularly sects of inquisitors who base their beliefs around trying to engineer a series of events where the emperor's soul is like put back in his body, or enough souls are sacrificed that the emperor can get back up and heal again. It's considered a loyal thing to believe for inquisitors, but it's very much on the edge of accepted thinking within the Imperium, the idea that you should even begin to think that you know how to resurrect the emperor. It's considered a very touchy belief to have. Linked into this whole conversation is also a thing called the Star Child. Just before the emperor fought Horus, he's said to have taken a little part of him, all of his like good bits, and cast them adrift into the warp, hidden, so that he would have the requisite mercilessness to fight against Horus. And the idea is that that stuff might actually still be out there. That might even be the thing doing all the miracles. No one knows. What would happen if the Star Child, the emperor's kind of nice soul, was recombined with the corpse that's sitting on the throne? No one really knows. Would that resurrect the emperor? Outside the lore, it's extremely unlikely that anyone's going to get to the point in the story where the emperor gets up. Not only would that ruin lots and lots of things that are needed in Terra, it also, you kind of end the setting that way. If the emperor gets up and becomes a real god and starts walking around fixing things, 40k probably, well, I suppose it'd be grimdark in a slightly different way, but yeah, I can't see it actually happening, and that is reflected in the fact that in the lore, lots of people don't know how they would ever go around doing that. Why was the Terminus Decree assigned to the Grey Knights, and how would they achieve it? So the Terminus Decree is a sort of locked order held in the Grey Knights Fortress Monastery, which says basically, if the Emperor ever gets up, get him back on the throne as quickly as possible. Do not let that happen. For all the aforementioned reasons, like you'd have to end Warhammer. Every single Grey Knight is an extremely powerful psyker. They fight in a very specific way. They're very much tooled towards that. Why was the Terminus Decree assigned to the Grey Knights, and how would they achieve it? So the Terminus Decree is a sort of locked order held in the Grey Knights Fortress Monastery, which says basically, if the Emperor ever gets up, get him back on the throne as quickly as possible. Do not let that happen. For all the aforementioned reasons, like you'd have to end Warhammer. Every single Grey Knight is an extremely powerful psyker. They fight in a very specific way. They're very much tooled towards countering psychic threats, countering the forces of chaos and demons and things like that. And they're fabulously well equipped. They were also built as something of a failsafe to start with. They were established right at the end of the Horus Heresy, alongside the Inquisition, as a sort of way of watching over humanity's progress in the years to come. By that point, Malcador, one of the Emperor's closest confidants, and the Emperor himself both knew that they likely wouldn't be alive or functioning by the end of the Horus Heresy, so they needed to put in place some sort of backup plans, and the Grey Knights were one of them. I would imagine the reason they have been given this job, as opposed to giving it to the Custodians, who are much closer to the Emperor, is that the Custodians' job is to be bodyguards to the Emperor, and they would never turn on him. So if the Emperor got up and started walking around, the Custodians are never going to use force to put the Emperor back on the throne. It has to be somebody else. And the closest, most powerful thing in that situation is probably the Grey Knights, because they're specifically tooled up to deal with giant, powerful psychers. There's a load of questions in there, like, would the Grey Knights functionally be able to attack or defeat the Custodes? The Grey Knights have very advanced technology. The Custodes arguably have even more advanced technology. One-on-one, Custodians are meant to be a bit more powerful than a Space Marine, but does that count when it's a giant psychic Space Marine? It seems very unlikely that the Grey Knights chapter of 1000 Grey Knights would be able to achieve this, but they are still ordered to have a go anyway. What is the Legion of the Damned, and do they actually prove the Emperor is a god? So, there's a load of different bits and bobs of lore about this. The Legion of the Damned are a force of like ghostly Space Marines covered in flame and armor who appear out of nothing to help beleaguered Imperial forces in their time of need. They're incredibly spooky, and no one knows where they come from or what they represent or what they are. In world, no one really knows about them. There's lots of theories by inquisitors who witnessed it that it might be a symbol of the emperor's divine will, like a holy vision or a miracle that has been granted. Also theories that maybe they're like the souls of dead space marines who kept on fighting even after death. Sometimes people have found banners from the Legion of the Damned saying, for the emperor beyond the point of death, and things like that on